1 of Class 10 Economics, Chapter 2, Sectors of the Indian Economy. We shall understand this chapter with the help of a story. So let me narrate the story of bread. Have you ever thought that how does a loaf of bread get to your breakfast table? Its story begins with the farmer growing wheat in his field. Then this wheat is processed and made into bread in the bread factory. This bread is then transported to the shops and finally reaches us. All these activities which involve production of goods and services are known as economic activities. Now, let us understand the classification of economic activities. So, economic activities can be classified on the basis of three factors. First, on the nature of activity, second, nature of employment, and third, on the nature of ownership. So, on the nature of activity, economic activities are classified into primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. And on basis of nature of employment, they are classified into organized and unorganized sector. So, this means that if the nature of employment is regular or unregular. Third, on the basis of nature of ownership, economic activities are classified into public and private. Now we shall understand each of these classifications in detail. First, primary sector. So the activities that are undertaken by directly using natural resources are known as primary sector activities. For example, agriculture, dairy, fishing, mineral ores, mining, and forestry. As most of these activities are related to agriculture, this sector is also known as agriculture and related sector. Second, secondary activities. So the activities in which natural products are changed into other forms through ways of manufacturing are known as secondary sector activities. For example, food processing, manufacturing of automobiles, manufacturing of garments, electronics, etc. And as most of these activities are related to industry and industrial production, this sector is also known as industrial sector. Third, tertiary sector. So the activities that help in the development of primary and secondary sector are known as tertiary sector activities. These activities don't produce a good, but they support in the production processes. For example, transport, communication, banking, trade, commerce, etc. And as these activities provide services, tertiary sector is also known as service sector. Now, the tertiary sector also includes jobs such as education, healthcare, accounting, lawyers, administrative work, and information technology, such as the softwares and all the mobile apps, etc. It is important to note that all these three sectors are highly interdependent on each other, and failure of one sector will result in the loss in other sectors also. For example, if we have a failure in the production of crops, then obviously the secondary sector, which is the manufacturing of that crop into bread, it will also fail, and this will result in the failure of tertiary sector also. So now let us see how the total production in different sectors is calculated. So consider the example of a car. Manufacturing of car requires many different components, but when we go to buy a car, do we pay for the individual components? Do we pay separately for the paint, for the seat cover, for the engine, etc. parts of the car? No, we don't do that. We only pay the final value of the car, which includes the values of the individual components. So only the final value of goods and services is used to calculate the production in a sector. The values of all the final goods and services produced within a country during a particular year gives us the GDP of that country. And GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. So the total production in the primary sector plus the total production in secondary sector plus the total production in tertiary sector in a particular year gives us the GDP of that country. And GDP tells us how big an economy is. So now let us see how much different sectors contribute to the GDP of a country. This depends on the state of development of that country. So in the initial stage of development, the primary sector was the most important sector and agriculture was the most important economic activity. But as new methods of manufacturing was introduced a few hundred years ago, the secondary sector became the most important sector and it became the major contributor to the GDP of a country. But in the past few decades, there was a shift from secondary to tertiary sector in the developed countries. And the tertiary sector became most important. So now let us see the contribution of the three sectors in India's GDP. So as you can see in the above graph, in 1973 to 1974, the primary sector was the major contributor to GDP. But in 2013 and 2014, though all the sectors expanded, the tertiary sector recorded the highest growth and emerged as the largest producing sector in India. So now let us see the reasons for this rapid expansion in the tertiary sector. First, the government took a lot of initiatives for the expansion of basic services such as hospitals, schools, banks, postal services, police stations, administrative offices and army, and all these things come under the tertiary sector. Second, development of agriculture and industry also led to development of the tertiary sector. So obviously if the agriculture would expand and more crops would be produced, then we will need better transportation and storage services for the crops. So the tertiary sector also grows with the primary and secondary sectors. Third, due to the rise in income of people, the demand for services such as private schools, private hospitals, restaurants, shopping centers, tourism have increased. And fourth, due to the improvement in technology, new services such as information and communication technology have become important and essential. So till now we have seen that the tertiary sector is the most important contributor in India in terms of GDP. But now let us see the role of these three sectors in terms of employment. So in terms of employment, the primary sector continues to be the largest employer with about 50% of the population engaged in it. So now let us see the role of these sectors in terms of employment and in terms of GDP with the help of these two graphs. So here you can see that in the primary sector maximum number of people are working, but its role in GDP is very less. So 49% of the people are engaged in the primary sector, but in terms of GDP it has only 15% role. So now let us see why more people are working in the primary sector and less in the tertiary sector. First, the tertiary sector requires skilled and educated people. So, and not everybody has that skill and education, and most of the people in India are uneducated. So that's why they are not able to get jobs in the tertiary sector. Second, not enough jobs are created in the tertiary sector. So in the tertiary sector, many jobs are based on technology and require very less manpower. So now let us see that why the primary sector has very little role in GDP of the country even after having a very high role in employment. So this is because most of the people in tertiary sector are underemployed or disguised unemployed. So this means that more people are than required are engaged in the primary sector, and removing few of them will not affect the production of the sector. So now let us see the people who are underemployed in other sectors. So the first is casual workers who search for daily employment in the urban areas. And second, the people who spend whole day in selling something but they earn very little. So thus there is need for more employment opportunities. We shall discuss more about this in the second part of this video, its link is provided in the description box. So stay tuned.